coming on to today's episode of Conversations with Tamika. My name is Tamika Mahomes, and we're so excited to have today's guest, Miss Marcie Fowler. Can you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Of course, my name is Marcie Fowler, and I'm married to Matt, who is a pastor. And we have 4 kids, and they are 16, 14, 6, and almost 5. So that's basically full time, full time for me. So most days I'm just home, homeschooling, and taking care of things in my home, and just ministering in my church throughout the week as I can.
I'm so excited to have you on as we prepare to talk about a topic that we don't really hear about very much. I know when I was introduced to your page, I was completely learning something new regarding biblical hospitality. And I really love what you're doing on your platform. And I would love if you can share with our listeners, what is biblical hospitality?
Sure. Thanks for having me too. This is just such a treat to talk about on here. Yeah, I think that's such a good question to start with, because I hear so many women, and I think so many women have this mindset of this, magazine or Pinterest worthy entertainment. And that is just not what the scripture has in mind when it talks about hospitality. So if you go to the New Testament and you look at the word hospitality in Greek, I'm not going to say the word, but it means the love of stranger. And so when you study that a little bit more, you realize you can go to Ephesians 2. You can go to verses 12 through 13 and 19, and you see that before God saved us, we were strangers of God. We were aliens. We were not his children, but it says by the blood of Christ, we were brought near to him, and we were declared no longer strangers. And so when you take that look at that and you say, okay, that's the root of hospitality. It's God being hospitable to us, God bringing us into his household when we were strangers and enemies of his. And so then when you are reminded of the gospel, then you get to, out of overflow, out of joy, you get to be hospitable to other people. And that looks like a lot of ways, but that's just kind of the basic in the nutshell of, we get to participate in what God has done for us. We get to love others in ways that point to the gospel and what Christ has done in our life.
I truly love that. And I think it's so important as a way for us to show others who God is and to truly walk out that display. What actually led you to pursue biblical hospitality and now get to a place where you're teaching it to others?
Yeah, so my husband and I was thinking about this the other day. We started hosting, I'm pretty sure the week we got back from our honeymoon, and we've not stopped since. So we have been hosting from basically day one. And I was thinking we lived where we lived about when we first married for 2 months before we moved across state for college. I think we hosted like 8 to 10 times. And it's not something that I was just like, okay, we're going to do this. It was just kind of in both of our hearts to show hospitality and just to have kind of an open home. And that looks different a little bit now with kids and stuff, but it was just kind of all something that we both desired to do, and just kind of started that from the beginning of our marriage. And I've learned a lot, it took me about 10 years of really honing some things that I have learned to realize that it doesn't have to be so overwhelming. So, for about 10 years, I was still close to weekly, if not every other week, showing hospitality, but it was a lot, and it was overwhelming, and it was just a big ordeal. And I finally, after 10 years, started learning some just real simple things that I could shift that would make this thing so much easier. And that's really what led me to start teaching women basically in the online ministry, just to teach women that it doesn't have to be so hard. It doesn't have to be so stressful or overwhelming. I don't want people to feel like it's not doable, because hospitality is 100% doable for just about everybody.
Right. I really love that on your platform you teach the simplicity in hospitality and learning how anybody can do it no matter what background they have, no matter where they are. Even now in quarantine, you teach about that. So, why do you think that it is so necessary for us as believers to know, understand, and walk in biblical hospitality?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, as believers, we get kind of our marching orders, we get our understanding of how we're supposed to live from scripture. And so, I could go to a couple of different passages, but I'll just stick to Romans 12:13, which it says we are to pursue hospitality. Other translation says practice hospitality. And so that's really where it comes from. And also, just to say, as believers, we know that commands from the Lord are not commands that we do out of duty. They're when we are obeying God, then we are doing so out of joy, and it is a delight to walk in obedience to Him. And there is so much potential that when we step into this obedience that we get to be a part of, that we truly miss out when we don't walk out this in our homes.
I recently took your course, Hospitality During Social Distancing Days. And it's crazy because we're in almost a year now of dealing with COVID and being in the house and dealing with this new normal. And one thing I love that you were teaching was that it is a command and we have to obey and walk in the commands of Jesus. So why do you think that us as believers that we often miss the importance of showing hospitality to one another?
I hear a lot of women come in my DMs on Instagram, and I honestly, I welcome that for people to tell me, what's your hospitality hurdle, because I want to help them. And the two biggest, I could say a lot, but the two biggest is, the first one is that it's their mindset about hospitality. I don't have time to clean my baseboards and cook, this elaborate meal. Well, I don't either. I mean, I didn't before kids, and I definitely don't now. So I think that's one. It's the view of how their home is supposed to look, and the second one is too busy. Everybody is too busy, and the reality is, as we make time for what's important. And so, if that means saying, to your kids, we're not going to do 5 extracurricular activities. We're not going to do 7 sports this season. Because the thing is, we have to make sure we keep priorities. So if you are setting the example that you can't even have someone over for a meal because you're never home, you are totally closing so many windows of hospitality. And that is such, even as having kids in our home, that is so important to walk that out in front of them and say, I know that you want to play this extra sport or whatever the case may be. But, this is why your dad and I are saying no to this. Like, this is important to us, and we want to include you in this ministry. And we can't do that if we're never home.
And as believers, what are some practical ways that you think that we can show biblical hospitality to one another, especially in the times that we're living in now?
Yeah, that is such a great thing to bring up, because, I do think typical hospitality needs to be in the home. I think it can go lots of places. I think you can, be out somewhere and be hospitable. But I think primarily, when I've found that when you bring people into your home, there is a connection that they make with you, because they know that you've sacrificed time, you've sacrificed energy and money, and you've put out this effort. And I've found that having people in my home is so important. But yes, we are in an unusual time. I cannot personally have people in my home right now. I haven't been able to for almost a year. And so, yeah, that's such a great question, because I worked through that this past year myself. And so there's lots of ways. Just to give you two, I would say something I call curbside hospitality is just making a meal for someone and dropping it off, and just saying, it could be any reason. It could be someone that's not able to come to church right now. It could be someone that, is really struggling with something, and you can make them a meal to not have to cook dinner that night would be such a blessing to them. And you could just make it and drop it off at their doorstep. The other thing is, now that we're going to be getting into nice weather, Like, be outside with people. There, you can spread out, you can keep your distance. You don't have, and it can be as simple as coming over. Like, all the times I hosted last year, I never had food. We never had food. We had people at off times, and we would just sit around and talk and fellowship and pray for each other and just try to invest and minister to each other that way.
Especially with today, because who imagined that we would be in a place where we can't commune together like we usually
Yeah.
would. We have to limit how many people we're with. We have to limit how close we are with people.
Yes.
But it's so important to still incorporate that hospitality even into our lives now, even though it looks different. And each time that we interact with these people, whether it's in our home or outside, when we're showing hospitality, we have an opportunity to share the gospel with them and to show them who Jesus is. So when we are showing hospitality to others, what are some ways that we can incorporate the gospel as we are showing hospitality to people?
So whenever we have people over, there's lots of ways to go about this. Sometimes you are planting seeds of the gospel with unbelievers. Sometimes you are saying the gospel to someone that they've never heard. So sometimes it is just saying, like, hey, could you tell me your spiritual beliefs, and listening to them. And they will always say, what do you think? What are you, believing on things? And that gives you an opportunity. But other ways is, if you have other believers in your life, you get to administer the gospel to them by being an encouragement when they're struggling, or by talking about, hey, tell me what the Lord is teaching you in your quiet time. Like, let's talk about the sermon from Sunday. Like, what did that show you about God and his glory and who he is? And so just living, and also living out the gospel. I think I've found that whenever I've had people over that aren't believers, just the fact that they are invited into your home or in your front yard is, and I live in the South, so we are very hospitable. It's the front porch. We're very hospitable, but there is still something about people and inviting you to something, because I do think as a culture, we're moving more individualistic. We're moving more kind of closed. We have so many things that bother us about each other. And so to have someone come into your home or into your front yard and you just talk to them, you get to know them, that's different. And that can be the aroma of Christ, because Christ got to know people and he walked with people, and he wasn't embarrassed about who he hanged out with, like the tax collectors, and he hung out with those people. And so just sometimes being around people gives you that window, not to not share the gospel, but it gives you that window a lot of times later to minister to the gospel.
The way that we live our lives, the way that we walk out the commandments that God calls us to walk out, the way we live and show others what's in the Bible and who Jesus is, that is how we share the gospel even in these times. And I really thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really thank you for just taking some time to teach us about biblical hospitality. And you share with our listeners how they can connect with you and also get some of your resources to learn more about biblical hospitality.
Sure. Thank you again. It's been such a joy to talk to you. So I'm on mostly a lot on Instagram. I teach a lot on there and give just kind of resources and different things on there. And it's Marcie Carol Fowler. Or you can search, I think, biblical hospitality will bring it up as well. And marciefowler.com. But probably Instagram would be the best way to connect with me.
I really appreciate you taking the time to be on this episode of Conversations with Tamika.